Okay, hello everyone, welcome. This is the third lecture in this semester's CD lecture series. Great to have everybody here, and yeah, great to see you, Talia. Thank you and welcome. Just do a quick introduction and then I'll turn it over to you. And sorry, I'm going to mute everybody. There we go. Yeah, so we're super excited to have Talia Cotton joining us today. Talia is a designer, coder, and educator who specializes in the intersection of branding and technology. Talia leads the design and development of algorithmic and data-driven brand identities and websites at Pentagram under the direction of Georgia Lupi and Michael Beirut. She's also an alumna of the Parsons BFA Communication Design program and is also currently teaching here in both the BFA and I think the AAS program. So Talia, welcome. Thank you again for coming in, and I'll hand the keys over to you. Awesome. Oh, I think you're on mute though. Sorry. Let me unmute you.
Thank you, Brendan.
There we go. Okay, now we can hear you.
Thanks everyone for being here. This is super fun. I wish we could be in person. I wish we could. I remember the energy that we all once had when we were all in the auditorium together. But this is so great. It's so nice to have all of you right here, right now. Hi everyone. So today, first I want to take a look at this and just sort of look at it together. Isn't it amazing? Isn't this so beautiful? What is going on here? This is a package design. There's the name of the company there at the bottom. There's the name of what the product is up here at top. There's no images. There's no messiness. There's this beautiful 3-column grid. Look at that big, beautiful, bold blue. Look at that white stripe on the top. Look at the simplicity of the materials that they're using for this specific thing. How amazing is this thing? This is a product design. This is circa mid-century. This is for those of you who are unfamiliar with this, Geiger was a medicine company, and what they did was they actually hired a bunch of designers to do not just their packaging, but pretty much their entire brand system. What I do at my job, we have a couple things that happen sometimes. Every now and then I'll be working, and one of my bosses will come right over and, you know, share something with me. They shared this with me, and this was Michael, and he brought me down a book once, and he said, "Look at this. This is so amazing. This is so beautiful." And he and I were there sitting there just like oohing and ahhing and gushing and moaning and just looking at the beauty of this Geiger design, just the simplicity and the meaning and everything behind it. And isn't it amazing? Let's take a closer look at this one. Oh my God, this is insane. This is so beautiful that people were able to come up with a design this simple and this complex and this cool. On the flip side, every now and then in my job, we have hour-long, sometimes hours-long meetings. This happened literally this past week, where I was in front of the computer for over an hour with talking about whether or not the top of the eye should have color. And this was with a client, and the client couldn't make up their mind. They went on for about an hour and a half, and they said, "Nope, we need to make that eye red. Nope, we need to make it same color as everything else. Nope, nope, nope." Which is frustrating. You know, it's frustrating that, you know, you spend all this time in front of something like this for something that small, and does that really matter sometimes? So when Brendan asked me to talk here, I said, "Thank you, Brendan." And then I said, "Brendan, what's the theme? What's going on here?" And he said there really is no theme, but what he's been thinking about and what he's pursuing is sort of this, within this lecture series, more or less, is the way that he's curating the people who are going to be here is this theme of pathways in and out of the discipline. How do people get to where they are? Why do people leave the discipline? So if I were to understand this and look at my life, which I believe to be a beautiful life, thank God, and I look at this and I say, okay, pathways in and out of the discipline. So if I were to break this up sort of systematically, what I'm doing now, that's what I'm doing. There's everything that came before this, there's how I got here, and then there's what comes next. So the theme is pathways in and out of design. So what should I focus on? You know, if I were to focus on what I'm doing now, for example, that's something that I get questions about what I'm doing now all the time. And most people who want to see, you know, people talk, or most people who want to see you talk, want to know things like, how do you avoid brand fatigue? What makes a good designer? What does your process, what does your current process look like? Where do you find inspiration? How can design save the world? Sort of trying to understand these questions for themselves by perhaps coming to a talk and seeing someone speak. I'm not going to be focusing on any of these today. I'm not going to be focusing on my work today. I will give you a little intro to sort of what I'm doing and what I do now, but I'm not going to focus on it so much. I just want you to know what it is that I do on a daily basis, so you'll understand sort of my standpoint for everything else. As Brendan said, I'm a designer and I'm also a coder. I specialize in branding and technology, the combination of those two. Although I do design in many different ways and I code in many different ways, what I specialize in is really the specifics, the combination of branding and technology. I work on 2 teams at Pentagram. That's also a little bit rare. I work with both Michael Beirut and Georgia Lupi. On either one of those teams, for Michael Beirut, at any given point, I could be working on code-driven identities. And on Georgia Lupi's team, at any given point, I could be working on data-driven design. So kind of a different, sort of crossing over at some points, but still different enough that I'm sort of occupied and doing something different on a daily basis, which I love. What I do on a daily basis, sometimes I just design brands. If there's no reason to involve coding in it, then why would we? Why would we put coding in it just because it exists? As much as I love coding, sometimes it doesn't make sense. This was one of the very first branding projects I ever worked on when after I graduated school. I was working on Champions Design. Memphis River Parks partnership was a series of parks, almost like the High Line down in Memphis. And what they needed was a really succinct system for the not just the parks themselves, but the individual sections within the park. That's what you see here on the right. This is just some logo, but what we did here was we had to apply it and sort of apply it as you would a brand. There was wayfinding. We had to think about how does the logo apply in a physical space? And that is the furthest thing away from coding that you would imagine. That's taking a logo and that's physically interacting with it within the space. That's saying what is a logo when it is human scale to a certain degree. So sometimes I just work on brands and that's okay. Other times I do the other end of the spectrum. I design and build websites. This is something that came out when I was working with Georgia Lupi's team. We did a beautiful little application, a web application to celebrate Earth Day in collaboration with Google Arts and Culture that visualized the microplastic particles that is in the air at any given point in time. And what we wanted to do was visualize this mostly just to spread awareness that at any given point, there are plastic particles in the air right now because plastic doesn't disintegrate. So we wanted to create an experience that sort of was engaging, that sort of told a story, that kept people on the site long enough to sort of learn that this is a phenomenon, that this does exist. I like to do sometimes, so I do brands, I do websites, sometimes I combine the two. So sometimes I like to design brands that think like websites, whatever that means. This was an example of a brand whose the main place where people are going to be interacting with this brand is on the web. So we had the ability to design it from an interactive perspective. This was the name of the organization was Judlow. We created a stackable logo to sort of an interactive stackable logo so as to say that Judlow, this organization, works around you, the user, for whatever your needs are. Whatever angle sort of makes sense for stackable letters. But from there, once we have a website and a beautiful logo that can do this thing, then we can start to apply that interactive logo, the interactive inspired logo, to things that are sometimes not necessarily coded. A business card, for example, doesn't have to be coded, but it can still mimic, it can still be part of the system, part of this brand design. So too with even something like a collection of mugs, if we were to think about what is the equivalent in real life about the stackable letters that isn't just a printed piece of paper, well, we can stack mugs and put them side by side and spell things with them. So that's sort of like a fun little way of approaching a brand designed for the web in real life. So I do brands, I do websites, I do brands and websites. And sometimes I do just some cool stuff because we can. This was an example of, I was working about a year and a half ago with a project that never ended up working. I think they went with a different direction. But one of the things that we were studying was DNA. And what are some of the ways of envisioning of DNA? Well, DNA sequencing, this is what happens when scientists are actually analyzing DNA. This is literally a photograph of what it looks like that they are looking at. So we were looking there, we were analyzing, we were saying, okay, there are these colors, there are these bands. Sometimes the bands are more spaced out than others. Sometimes they're closer together, sometimes they repeat, sometimes they're a little bit more randomized. From there, we wanted to create a typeface that sort of does the same thing. Now, DNA sequencing, it's not randomized, it's very specific, but it is so unique and so special that something like a random function might be just the thing to sort of get that exact kind of specificity that the DNA actually has. So we created a typeface that's inspired by DNA sequencing, one that can be readable if you like it to be, or you can, by making the spacing super tight, and maybe making the density really, really big, or you can kind of space it out, make it almost pretty much illegible, just to sort of mimic something that looks like the DNA sequencing would in some cases, but really making this sort of like a playful experiment. And what's really fun is those instances where you're sort of on that border between, you know, the really readable and maybe the not so readable. This definitely looks like sequencing. It's very graphic in its composition. You do sort of see that it says DNA, but then you do sort of start to see that it is sequencing. It's really fun when you get to do stuff like this. But like I said, I'm not going to focus on my work today. I want you guys to sort of to see what I do, just so that everything is within a context. But what I'm doing now is not going to be the focus. If we're thinking about how I got here, that's also a question that I think I get this question even more than what I'm doing now. Questions I get are, how did you pursue coding and design? How did you get your current job? How do you get recognition? How did you start teaching? What is it like being a woman who codes? These are all questions that people are seeking for answers, hopefully to maybe get to where I am or pursue something similar. And I'm actually not going to focus on this either. I do want to give you guys just a little bit of a background to where I was. So I was raised by musicians. We're going to go through this even quicker just because I do want to get to the good stuff. I was raised by musicians. I was raised in a super creative household right here in New York City. I was homeschooled till 3rd grade. So they made sure that we were going to all the museums here, but also going to museums, going and being exposed to culture and different things, but then also, you know, math and science and whatnot. So much so that when I was in school, when I was in high school, I loved everything. I loved science, I loved math, I loved history, I loved English, I loved art, I loved everything. So that when I went to college, I actually didn't go to Parsons at first. I actually went to pursue a degree in business and psychology because I said, business and psychology, as much as I love art and everything creative, business and psychology will pay me better. Therefore, I will go and pursue a degree in business and psychology. Realized halfway through that I wasn't fulfilling that creative bone, transferred to Parsons to pursue design, reluctantly took my first coding class. And I mean reluctantly, I actually went into the coding class saying, this isn't going to be for me. This is stupid. I'm just going to take this because it's required. And that's going to be the end of that. But I loved it. And then I worked my butt off in coding and design because I loved it, because it's just something that I really, it combined everything that I was into. It combined sort of like the sciencey thinking, the math thinking, the creative thinking, the art, the creative environment that I was raised in. It kind of all made sense. It all sort of came together combined with, so I worked my butt off, but because I wanted to, because it was something that I really was really in love with. And I continued to. So even after Parsons, so I worked my butt off at Parsons, and then even afterwards, it's the kind of thing where my birthday every year, I decided that I would want to create a new coding and design sketch, because that's the thing that I would love so much. So there's this theme of really pursuing it, really mostly because you love it, and because it fulfills so many things. What comes next? That's sort of the third piece to the puzzle, and that's the most unknown, and that's the one that I also don't get asked the most. But what I do get asked, and I'm sure everyone may have been asked this at some point by their friends and whatnot. And when I was thinking about this, I said, okay, if you could choose any other career, what would you choose? And I do get asked this by my friends. And at the end of the day, I could start and think, I could brainstorm, I could say, okay, maybe there's some other things. But today, and especially considering the past year and a half that we've had, this question kind of has new meaning. This question is now less about, if you could choose any other career, what would you choose? This question now has sort of morphed into, well, see how design isn't really doing much, what would you do that sort of has more of an impact? Or what do you feel like you're actually being fulfilled? Would you want to actually, like, what would you do differently if not for design? And that makes sense. That makes sense because we're coming out of this period where the essential workers around us are actually directly affecting and saving lives. They're risking their lives on an hourly and secondly basis to directly save people's lives. That's insane. What can we say that we're doing that is even nearly as great as what that is? These guys are heroes is an understatement, because what they're doing is incredible. Us as designers, we try to do whatever we can. We see that the world around us is rallying and doing something amazing to really try to save these lives. And we say, okay, what can we designers do? Design can save the world. So let's give it our best shot. Let's put our best foot forward and let's do something about it. This was Luke Heyman at Pentagram did a Neighborhoods Now campaign, which is a campaign to put a mask on, because maybe that'll save lives. It's cute, it's sweet. It says, keep 6 feet apart. He relies on pretty illustration and coloring to sort of send the message that you should put your mask on, which is still not directly saving lives, but perhaps someone somewhere will put their mask on and perhaps prevent the spread of something, right? This was another thing that design tried to do. This one's called Combat COVID. Design takes over Times Square, which is kind of funny, right? Because if you're saying combat COVID, we're going to combat COVID, we're going to do it, and we're going to combat it. And yeah, design takes over Times Square. It doesn't really fit. It's kind of embarrassing, if you will, that we are saying that we're going to combat COVID with design. I'm just sort of playing devil's advocate here. I know these are wonderful things, but these are things that we need to be thinking about as designers. Like, is this actually what we should be doing with our time on this earth? Okay, so on my end, so those are things that I wasn't a part of. And on my end, our team was also, trying to do our best as designers to make a difference. So the pandemic hit and we all, came together and, we were all affected and we were all emotional. And we said, okay, well, what if we gave people something to be happy about? Maybe that would be something that we as designers could do to make a difference. What if we gave people something to be happy about? Well, we created this really sweet little project called Happy Data. And for Happy Data, we made a little brand that worked with it. What the theme of Happy Data was, everyone was cooped up inside, everyone was not seeing the sunlight. So what if and there was all this bad data all around us all the time. So what if we said, all right, we'll combine those two things. You take a picture outside of your window, whatever your personal view is, and we draw some sort of happy data that exists in the world. We had to do our research, we had to discover it, and show people that maybe there is actually some good things going on, sort of juxtaposed with what we are seeing in our homes. It's an interesting concept. There was like the brand had like a little interaction. It's a sweet little thing. It really is. It's nice to sort of to put this thing in a perspective, especially since people were going through things. It's not going out. It's not deliberately saving people's lives. It was what our best shot was at bringing happiness to people during this time. And at the end of the day, it's images and it's illustrations, and there's a limit to how much power that kind of thing has compared with the people who are out saving lives directly. Again, I'm just playing devil's advocate here in a way, but we need to be thinking about this. So then the pandemic kept on going, and we said, okay, well, what if we captured the sentiment in New York? Suddenly New York was sort of coming back alive. This was, last summer before it is what we have now. And we said, and there were protests going on. So New York was sort of losing some part of itself, but also morphing and thinking towards the future. So we said, okay, what if we designed something that captured the sentiment in New York? So we did our research and we said, okay, what is very New York in this kind of a time that, since we're cooped up inside, we cannot do, but maybe if we can make something virtual, we can sort of bring people together and rally them. Well, New York has this wonderful, wonderful ability to sort of come together in times of trouble. This was, I think, in the election when Hillary unfortunately lost the election. The subway stations were covered in these Post-its with people who were pouring their heart out about the subject at hand. So we said, okay, this is a very New York thing to do. We cannot do this because people are not really yet leaving their homes happily and feeling safe. So what if we built something online that sort of does this thing? We built something called Dear New York, where people can fill out their own Post-it saying what they miss New York for and what they hope New York will become. And it's really nice for them to be able to sort of express themselves, but then also see what the other people have posted. This is really trying to mimic that New York experience. And there's a lot to it, and you can walk a block and you can change the background. You can really try to exude the feeling of being out in New York. And as a design piece alone, it's really wonderful. But does it make that impact? COVID kept on going, and eventually the vaccine came out, and eventually people, fewer and fewer people were leaving us. And at that point, we were still thinking, we were like, this is something, what if we created a memorial for all the lives lost? So many people lives lost. What if we were to create a memorial? Now that is a serious design challenge. That is so much more than the other two that we've seen so far, because a memorial is serious. These are people's lives. How do we actually sort of capture the life of a person who has passed in using design? So we were thinking about life and death, and how when you die, what does that even mean? And we were thinking about, when you die, you do live on. You do have a life beyond your life, in the sense that the people who you impact and the people who you have impacted and the people who remain here, you're still there. So we were thinking about something that is beautiful, because people are beautiful, something that is alive because you are alive, and you have this sort of life after your death, in that sense, abstractly. So we wanted to focus on the theme of flowers. Flowers are very in line with a memorial. Maybe there's something there. What's nice is that we have at our disposal coding for design. How wonderful is that? And coding, just like flowers are unique, just like every person is unique and every flower in a bouquet is unique, so too can coding be unique. So we're using coding here as a design tool, but coding is also inherently blocky. If anyone has ever tried to draw something beautiful with code, it's hard. It's hard because we're so used to using squares and circles and geometric shapes when we code. This won't work. This won't work for a memorial. We don't want to draw pansies that look like Hello Kitty. We just don't. So what we did was we really went to the drawing board, and we were trying to say, okay, with the tools that we do have to play with, how do we create something that code can potentially make that still sort of looks like that sort of the beauty that perhaps these flowers have. So we played with this idea of tiling these circles and sort of multiplying them over each other. We played with, I'm sorry, there we go. Secondly, we looked at, oh God, my, bear with me, this is panicking just a second and I'm going to get it right back on track. Okay. Alrighty, so we tried that kind of sketching style. We asked ourselves, okay, maybe if this were to mimic sort of like cutouts, you know, people create cutouts, every cutout is unique. Perhaps we could code that. So here we did it. How would we code something that looks like this? Well, if we create sort of like a set of randomly generated sets around a theme, then maybe we could combine those and maybe combine that with sort of like the texture that we had explored previously to create these sort of like unique, beautiful, human looking flowers. At the end, we sort of said, well, we want to do something that almost doesn't even look like it was coded. We want to do something that's sort of like singing and combining and colorful and beautiful. And we landed on, we said, okay, this is something that's definitely codable, but there's something really beautiful in the complexity of the differentiation between these. In that although they're all more or less part of a similar family, the colors alone and the shapes of these individual petals and the quantity of these petals, there's sort of like this inability to comprehend what exactly is going on here with in terms of the color and the way that they're combining, but it still is, it's still codable in a way. Maybe we could sort of branch out and maybe make a whole series of different kinds of flowers to sort of symbolize different kinds of people. Maybe that would be something that we could do. We had what's nice here is that it is really nice, big and bold when it takes up, when you zoom into this thing, it has this texture, it has sort of like this quantity, just like people when you look close up at them. But then when you stand back, you kind of see sort of like a busyness to this. You sort of see how everyone really is unique, but still sort of part of a series. So flowers, it all makes sense. The design has a meaning. The design couldn't be better, right? Not to mention, code can make things move and code can make things grow. So what if, since this was going to be a digital piece, what if at 100% of the time, these flowers were always sort of like blowing in the wind, so as to say that we as people are always sort of responding to our surroundings and going with the flow. And since code can be live in time, maybe we can also lean into sort of like the amount of time that this person has been passed away to maybe perhaps influence the size and the growth of this. Maybe someone who's been passed away for a little bit longer, maybe their life after death is just a little bit bigger, so to speak. Maybe their impact is felt a little bit stronger. So it's beautiful. We went in, we coded these things and they were gorgeous. Well, the result was something that was like even better than what we had sketched out. These are the coded flowers at the end of the day. And they don't look as, you know, maybe directly flowery as you would imagine. These almost look like art. This almost looks like something the last thing you would expect a code to do, which is sort of what we were trying to do. And yet, so the design does the trick, but does the design actually leave an impact? Does the design do anything? If we make a whole garden, a whole memorial garden with these beautiful coded flowers, that's an amazing thing to do, but what really does it do? How much really does that impact people? Especially when seen next to the people who are out there risking their lives on a secondly and hourly basis to save the people directly around them. And this is sort of like the theme that's going through our heads for the past year and a half. What can we do that is the equivalent? In my work, so that's sort of what we're fighting with here. Not, and to make matters worse, and this really is to make, like, that's just the beginning. In my work, we have the pleasure of working with some amazing clients. So on a daily basis, you know, we'll be in any meeting and we'll leave the meeting and we'll say, that was amazing. These people are doing incredible things. One of our clients, this one that we see here, this looks hilarious and this looks ridiculous, but what this tool does is it sort of understands your brain in a way to measure creativity. The amount of work that goes into the ability to measure creativity, it's both technological, it's the hardware, it's the software, it's the neuroscience, it's understanding all of the moving parts. It's coming up with a system that can actually measure creativity. That's insane. And these people are dedicating their lives to something like that. Another one of our clients works on the subject of forgiveness from a scientific standpoint. Some of the research papers that we were exposed to were called things like the effects of a forgiveness intervention on patients with coronary artery disease, the forgiveness of others and health, do race and neighborhood matter, striving for peace through forgiveness in Sierra Leone. We're talking, these people are talking about peace, and we're here moving pixels around. Another one of our clients, this one just blows my mind. Another one of my clients uses artificial intelligence combined with chemistry, chemical reactions, to come up with new ways to cure diseases that will potentially cure all diseases and save billions of lives from a petri dish. That is insane. And we're here sitting in these meetings and just being wowed by these amazing clients and designing, and that's what we're doing. And it's not just that. I mean, even an architecture client, an architecture client whose work is a design in a way, it is creative in a way. When you talk about architecture, at least there's sort of this perspective of perhaps you will be, if you're an architect and perhaps even an urbanist, your goal can literally be to reinvigorate civic life by restoring the urban cores of towns and providing an alternative to suburban sprawl. So even architects who work with visuals are still having more of an impact around the people around them. We're here moving pixels around. We're here saying, what if the top of this eye were red? We're here doing all this stuff. We're here preceding all of our sentences with, this doesn't really matter, but maybe you should. It's kind of funny. It's kind of funny that we do this. So, and I promise this is the end of the pessimism. There's no pessimism in this talk, actually. But in a world where design is not considered essential work, it begs the question, is design even essential? Is it? Let's pretend for a second. Let's pretend for a second that design didn't matter. I'll make a small little caveat just to clear the air. I do think design matters, and we're going to get to that in just a second. But let's even pretend, let's play devil's advocate, and let's just say, what if design didn't matter? What if we're just doing this, and what if design didn't matter? And yet we come back to this question of, if you could choose any other career, what would you choose? And I would do what I'm doing now. That's the answer to the question. I wouldn't choose anything else. I wouldn't become a pilot. I wouldn't become a nurse or a doctor, as much as I know I would probably enjoy it. I would still do what I'm doing now, even with all of that stuff going on. So, and it's not just that I would just do what I'm doing now. It's that I do what I'm doing now willingly and with love. There's so many nights, and I'm sure everyone on this call has been up at 3 a.m. and been working maybe for several nights in a row and had the thought of, I'd rather be doing this than sleeping right now. It's amazing that that's what we do. We're in this place where we do this not just because we love it, but we love it. Like we're passionate about what we do. You guys, this is a really intense week in the semester. I know a lot of people, for whatever reason, this is sort of the part of the semester where people are, getting really tired at the end of the class. I teach a 7 p.m. class that ends at 10 p.m. This is my wonderful student, Munis, who by the end of the class, because he's so overworked, he's falling asleep. And this sort of is so characteristic because his head is kind of falling into the Zoom background. It's so wonderful. But Munis is just like me and just like all of you, in the sense that even though, he's falling asleep at the end of class, but he's still in it. He's still pushing himself and he's still doing an amazing work. I told Munis that I would use his image if I could promote his work. So everyone on this call, right after this call, go look at Munis's work. This is his website down here. He's really fantastic designer. He's He works his butt off in both technically and creatively, and it's really incredible all the work that he does. So that's Munis. That's my shout out to my student. Okay, and so why do we do what we do? Why do we stay up at 3 a.m. and why do we say I would rather be doing this than sleeping right now? And things like this, there's things like this where we look at it and we're like, oh my God, this is amazing. We gush over this stuff. We gush over the fact that this little apostrophe fits perfectly between this G and this S, and how the arches there in the bottom kind of mirror each other, but don't, because these are two completely different letters, and how this G kind of almost touches this S, and how the spacing is just so beautiful, and how this sort of arch goes there and how that arch goes there. It's just amazing. It's so beautiful. We can gush over how, you know, maybe the italic capital T of Baskerville has this pretty little thing, and maybe it's sort of echoed in that little N, and it's not over the top, it's not the entire typeface, but we can appreciate that. We can look at that and we can say, this is amazing. This is so beautiful. Some people can appreciate that the number of letters that make up a word combined with their respective widths determines space. That's design, I guess, in a nutshell. This is what that means. This is that these are words and they take up space because of the letters that make them up. I mean, it's such a simple concept, and that's something that we all acknowledge and we all work with, and we cannot possibly work without acknowledging this. And yet it is still so beautiful to us. It's still so amazing. We can gush over that perhaps there can be a letter, a piece, a character, a glyph that is responsive in a way that can be the same level of readability no matter what the size is, and still sort of consistent within a system no matter what the size is. It can grow, it can shrink. This is stupid. Why should we gush over something like this? This does not matter, but this is so cool. We're all like, oh my God, there are squares and they line up diagonally. It's so beautiful and so cool because it's the letter M also. We can gush over, some people would gush over default styles, the fact that blue Times New Roman with a blue underline underneath it, it has both design and function embedded within it in one. It's so cool. We can gush over how different typefaces have different historic backgrounds because of the technologies available at the time. We can gush over that. That is super cool too. We can even gush over how maybe just a tiny little red circle sort of blinking on and off can hold so much meaning for us. Something like that is gushable in a way, isn't it? We can gush over so many other things, both in our lives and beyond. Even Michael Beirut gushes over this kind of stuff. This is a screenshot from just the other day where he says, I mean, come on, it's a book cover with a giant black rectangle on it, and we are gushing over this stuff. But let's pretend design didn't matter, because that's what we're pretending here today. At the end of the day, we truly love what we do, and that is why we do it. We even if design didn't matter, we're here, we're doing this stuff because we love it. We are the luckiest people because we are passionate about what we do. That begs the question. That's one way to think about it, but that begs the question: if we are pretending design doesn't matter, and we nonetheless do it because we love it, just because that love and that passion and that gushing and just that satisfaction from a blinking red circle, does that mean we're doing this for ourselves? Are we possibly here up at 3 a.m. because we love it? Is that only because we love it? Is there any benefit for that for the rest of the world? And yes, there is. And it's a very simplistic view, but what's good and what's nice about us designers, on one hand, is that we're fulfilled. We have this passion, we have this love, we have the ability to hone in on very simple, small things and appreciate them. We have the ability to hone in on a small red circle and say, this thing has meaning, and isn't it beautiful? We can see life through a different lens than other people, and we should be taken care of in that regard. We can, unlike so many people out there today who don't have a passion, who are there working on a daily basis because they need to pay something, because maybe they fell into it because that's what they fell into out of college. We're doing what we love, and that's amazing. Nobody, including myself, pursued design because it paid well, or because it makes our parents happy, or because it looks impressive. There's nothing shiny about design from the outset, and yet we are all here. We're all here, and we should be taken care of because of that. And us being taken care of, we're all familiar with, you know, put your mask on yourself before you help other people. This is on an airport. You see this little mnemonic whenever you board an airport. Maybe a very simplistic view to this whole thing, maybe, is that since we're taken care of, what if our impact on the world were actually just smaller scale? What if our impact were person to person? In the sense that we're taken care of, we're good, we're fulfilled, and we're happy, and we have that in our backpack of successes. So what if we can then turn our attention to the individual people around us and perhaps make a difference for them directly on a person-to-person basis? That's one way to think about it, and I promise there's just a little bit more. It's a little bit like it could be there could be something there, but it gets better. So I said, I get all these questions. What makes a good designer? How do you avoid brand fatigue? What does your process look like? These are all usually questions that people want answered when they are, when they come to a talk. They want to sort of get inspiration and learn so that they can sort of get successes, become a better designer, that kind of thing. And I'm actually going to tell you what, to me, makes a good designer. Why? Because we're here. A good designer takes two different things into account. You need an ability to understand your subject, and you need a grasp of the implications of visual tools. Just these two things alone will make you a good designer. Let's take a look at the first one. This is the simplest one, a grasp of the implications of visual tools. Okay, what does that even mean? The implications of visual tools. What are some of the visual tools that we use? I mean, this isn't an entire 4 years of design school all in a presentation, so I'm not going to try to do that. But generally speaking, we need to understand the implications of, we can appreciate, the differences between typefaces, but we also need to understand the implications of that this one here all the way on the left, we need to understand both the time period that it was used most often, but also the technologies that were sort of limited in that time that caused this specific thing. We need to understand that, because if we're going to choose that typeface, we need to do it knowingly and ownably. We need to recognize the specific implications and the associations that people make with these specific visual tools. We need to understand things like hierarchy. This is a very simple example. Of course, there are many rules that go into hierarchy, but we need to understand that. We need to understand sort of like the relationship between elements. We need to understand that a circle, even if it has the same dimensions than a square, is actually smaller. It has a smaller surface area, and whatever the implications are of that. We would also understand that a circle is softer and a square has edges. We need to understand the elements that we're working with. An ability to understand your subject is, I'd say it's just as important. These two work side by side, but an ability to understand your subject is often the one that is overlooked the most, but it is still so important. What do I mean by an ability to understand your subject? Well, we as designers, to be a good designer, like to be the best, I told you I'm not going to tell you how I got to where I got to, but this is how I got to where I got to. We have to do our research. So if we're designing for a certain subject, we need to look into that subject. We need to sort of collect things and make organizations out of things and understand our subject as much as we possibly can. This is just a screenshot of, just one of my many projects. Before I even go into the design phase, I organize and I say, okay, what are the archives of this subject? What are the areas? What are the past logos that this thing has had? What is the signage? What is the map? Just acquainting yourself with what your subject is and researching it will make you a better designer. We have to talk to people. Part of the research isn't just collecting things. Part of our research is actually talking to people. We have to be able to read them. We have to be able to understand them. We have to be able to ask the right questions to get them talking about what their subject is so that we can understand it better. We have to admit being wrong. We have to admit being wrong. This was a concept for a logo that I do this all the time, and you do this in design school as well, where your teacher says, you know, you come into class and you say, this is the best design I've ever done. And then the teacher comes in and says, joke's on you. It's not the best design you've ever done. Do it all over again. And we have to go back and we have to admit, and we have to say, as much as I loved what that was, I have to do it again. This was a logo concept that I did a long time ago and for a client. And for me, this was like it, because the logo, the client subject was about a little light. And this logo, it doesn't just have a light in it. Sure, it has a little light, but there's also this symbol of support. The bottom part is coming up and the top part is this rainbow. It's a symbol of prosperity. And the bottom part, again, it's sort of the symbol of positivity because it's a smile, and sort of all this is embedded within the logo, not to mention the uniqueness of this logo, that it can have this variation. You can sort of separate the top and the bottom, create whatever kind of thickness you want, and then the logo, this light, sort of becomes whatever you want it to be. It can be the container for data. It can be anything in the world. And the client came back and said, no, because we're more like this. We don't identify with geometric figures. We're more sort of malleable, and we sort of work with whatever we have. So I had to admit defeat. I had to admit that I was wrong, because the client knows themselves better than I ever will, no matter what my research does. We have to put our biases aside. And this is a really relevant one, especially today. This is something that we have to tell ourselves, and we have to actively say this out loud sometimes, no matter who the client is. We have to say, just because I would do it doesn't mean the audience would. That's in branding, that's in user experience design. That's really, just because you do a certain thing, that doesn't mean the rest of the world will. So we have to put our biases aside and sort of be open to other people's cultures and backgrounds. We have to expand our vocabularies. One of the brands that I showed you earlier, sort of one of our clients that we're working with on the subject of forgiveness, and they sent us all those research papers. We dig through those research papers because we don't know the science of forgiveness. We can pretend that we do. We can say we're passionate about it, but no matter what, we have not spent as many hours in our lives researching and learning about forgiveness as these people have. So we go in and we organize and we learn and we train ourselves to sort of see and have this new vocabulary that we didn't otherwise have. And that is necessary to be a good designer. And we have to understand people sometimes better than they understand themselves. Somebody tells you one thing, and this is really where designers are astute. This is where you have to sort of read people super well to be a good designer, because someone tells you something and you have to say, well, what do you actually mean? So for example, the dot on top of the eye, if the client spends an hour and a half saying, no, the eye needs to be red, no, the eye needs to be the same color of this, it's our job to say why. It's our job to say, okay, if they are debating between the red and the white on top of that, what is it that they really want that they don't really know that they want? And maybe the solution is something else. Maybe the solution is something completely different that solves what they don't know is a problem, but is. And they're sort of like saying that through the cracks. So let's pretend that design doesn't matter. That's what makes a good designer. And let's pretend that, you know, we're doing this and we're doing all these wonderful things, but let's just pretend that design doesn't matter. What I want to leave you guys with is this idea that maybe let's just pretend, and maybe design doesn't have the power to change the world. I said earlier that I do think it does, and that's a different lecture entirely, but let's just play devil's advocate for a second and say, what if design cannot change the world? But people do, and we are people. And people have the ability to change the world one action at a time, one person to person. And designers, by definition, have this power most, because embedded in what we do is the ability to read people, is the ability to put our biases aside, is the ability to research and expand our vocabularies. And all of this that makes us good designers is what will ultimately make us better people. And that's the end.
Talia, thank you so much. That was fantastic. Super inspiring. And yeah, appreciate again you coming in to speak with us. We have just a few moments, technically, if anybody has questions or thoughts that they'd love to add to the discussion. I'll open the floor. You can unmute yourself, I believe. But thank you again, Talia. You can also add to the chat and I'll read them for you if you would like.
Any questions? Anyone care to debate? Anyone disagree? Anyone, any disagreement at all? Any devil's advocate?
I mean, I'll take you up on the passion principle, you know? Look, I don't know. I mean, I guess because I've been a designer for my whole career, I wasn't someone who necessarily explored those other options. And I think I do have a passion for it, but I also feel like I'm in design because it's the thing that I know how to do. And I don't know that there's like another path for me, you know?
Yeah. And I'm the same. I guess a lot of people here are the same. A lot of people here, you know, we found it. We found the thing that makes us happy. So now we can, you know, share that.
Oh, but that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know that it's the thing that necessarily makes me happy. It's just the thing, it's like the thing that I figured out how to do. And I don't, you know what I mean? Like, it's not that I've been there with you grinding it out at 3 a.m. And even recently, I know because we were working on this poster together. But I'm just saying that I don't know that that's by choice is all I'm saying. Like, that's my.
Oh, yeah. So I guess, obviously I'm not, I don't have all the answers, but the one thing that I didn't say is that we're in this, and this does make us passionate. And if it doesn't, if there are other things that might, then go and pursue those. We're doing this because it makes us happy. We're doing this for what it gives us, how it fulfills us. And I don't know, Brendan, if there are other things that make you happy, maybe we could do this.
No, that's
well, I have a contrarian question,
Please.
which is, and because I think this is also very specific to like Parsons students and, you know, a lot of us on faculty too. Like, why do we have to be useful? Like, what is that? What is this feeling that the things that we do have to like matter so much or be so useful? Because I look at people who make some very beautiful and useless things, and I have like this mix of like both admiration and also kind of like resentment sometimes, you know, like it's all mixed together, right? It's like, where does that come from, and what can we do with it to at least feel a little bit more free would be my question. So like, why do you think you feel like your work should be essential?
Well, that's actually sort of what I'm saying, is that even if the work itself isn't essential, it's sort of like or useful. Sometimes we do things just because they're beautiful and just more mesmerizing, or just beautiful design, things that we can gush over that don't necessarily have an impact. But us as designers, and what makes us good designers, and being, you know, having the ability to sort of spread that perspective on the world to others, that's where we can make our impact. Not necessarily in the work itself, but as our perspectives and our experience in the world as living, breathing designers.
One question that popped up in the chat is, as an educator, what is the best way to help others realize their potential for affecting change?
When you
Something I think
say, Gloria,
I struggle with for sure.
when you say others, are you saying students in general? I'm going to assume yes. So my direct answer for that is just going back to, it's almost another way of saying what makes a good designer. Good designer being, you know, what makes me a good designer, but what makes me a good designer. And the answer to me really there is, and we're doing this in our class, is making sure that you're doing the research, you're talking to your subjects, you're putting your biases aside, because at the end of the day, that's the only way that your designs are going to be truthful, accurate, right, good, all of those things. So as an educator in all my classes, that's sort of the point that I drive home. And some of my students hate me for it because I'm always like, yes, but why? Why did you do this decision? So I'm always going to be saying that.
Hi, Talia. I have a comment to add. First of all, thank you for the talk. It was very informational. But I want to ask, how do you find motivation when you're like working at 3 a.m.? Because when I do that, that's when I question myself that like if this is actually what I want to do, and if I'm working on something that doesn't have a purpose or meaning that like contribute to the greater good of the society, and I'm just doing that for myself, I find it like I have a lack of motivation to go through with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when that happens, how do you solve that?
Well, I'll ask you right back, and then I'll answer. Do you ever have the opposite happen? Do you ever have I am up at 3 a.m. and I'm actually, you know, enjoying this and having a good time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the thing about being up at 3 a.m., which we cannot deny because we are human beings, is the physiological part of it. Is that sometimes we'll be up at 3 a.m. for like the third day in a row, and our body simply needs sleep. So our emotions are controlled by that, and it's sometimes easy to sort of feel down and feel like, you know, what am I actually doing? And what I try to do personally when I get there, because we all do, is sort of understand it within context and understand and say, well, I'm up at 3 a.m. and although I love what I do, I also understand that my body has certain human functions, and sort of the ability to kind of like see it from see yourself from bird's eye view and say, you know, yes, you're tired and yes, you're emotional, but you know, that's just because of the context. I guess that's what I do. I don't want to say that that's always the case. And I do want to say that I think it's good that if you are questioning why you're doing what you're doing, if it does have an impact, I think that that's good. I think that's a question that, even though I've sort of here today given you guys all sort of like one weird kind of perspective on it, where we can make an impact on the people around us person to person as opposed to through our designs, we should still be asking that question. If you guys ever have a doubt about why am I doing what I'm doing, you know, lean into that. Sometimes the answer is going to be just keep going forward. And sometimes the answer is going to be, I am going to go and become a nurse and save lives directly because that is what I want to be doing. It's really, it's listen to yourself in that case.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Talia, I just want to say thank you again for coming in. We're a little bit over time, so I think we can kind of release the room. And yeah, again, really appreciate you coming in for this. It was fantastic to see your presentation, and yeah.
Thanks, you guys. Really nice to see you all.
Thanks for your time. Yeah, and thanks for everybody. Please be sure to join us again in a couple more weeks for the next iteration of our CD lecture series. Awesome.
Bye.
Good to see y'all.